So now that we have some context on Noora, let's talk about like the different data streams that Noora kind of receives from all of the different programs that we have on the field. One is, of course, monitoring data, like I spoke about, right? Which is healthcare workers recording all of the sessions that they have and making sure that all of the data is transmitted real time to Noora so that we can kind of like keep a check on the quality, keep nudge people who are not necessarily conducting sessions, try to understand exactly why they're not able to reward high performing facilities, so on and so forth. The other is product data, or what I said about the user facing digital products, right? Like the WhatsApp bot, IVR, teletraining, and so on. So as you can imagine, we have data on the user engagement there. The questions that people ask on our WhatsApp bot, the engagement with our WhatsApp channels, how often people have picked up calls, so on and so forth. And then the last one, which is kind of something that is not as real time as the other two, but is something that's equally important, which is the impact evaluation. So we conduct rigorous studies to ensure that our program is actually generating the impact that we claim, truly trying to understand, what kind of other factors affect the kind of impact that we're trying to create and so on. So we have a strong research team that, uses impact evaluations to understand like what we're doing right. And they also collect a lot of data. It's in the form of either service CTO forms or Google Sheets, so on and so forth. So broadly, these are the three brackets of data that we have. And today we'll be focusing on the monitoring data aspect of, the monitoring data, where we're giving you an example of how the data quality there matters. So just keep that in mind as we go through. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, cool. So before we jump into like, what we mean by, data quality, what are the kind of quality measures that we have, I thought I'll just drop, we'll talk a little bit about why we use Dalgo in the first place. So one is, of course, that, it uses all of the best open source tools that we have available. We have Airbyte, DBT, Superset, all of that built in, essentially kind of combined into one platform, which is awesome because these are all tools that we are also considering anyway, and they're open source. So if there are any changes, any contributions, we can make that easily. It's also cost effective and NGO friendly, which I'm sure is the kind of USP of Dalgo as well. We work with impact sector organizations, nonprofits, and so on. So all of the benefits that come with that, which is that it's relatively cost effective, not as expensive to run and maintain, support team being readily available and meeting you where you're at. All of those things apply. So obviously, it's a first solution that people think of when you're in the NGO space. And then, of course, that it's a end-to-end, it's an all-in-one solution versus being a collection of small different tools that we put together just for this purpose. So, like I said, we can look at our entire end-to-end pipeline in just one place. So that's another major draw for us to use Dalgo. So now let's talk about what are some of the considerations for Noora. So you heard Pratiksha talk about what are some general considerations for data quality, what you should look for, how you should monitor the quality, and so on. Now let's talk about like how those principles apply for Noora. So one thing that, as I'm talking, you would have realized is that we are in multiple countries, therefore use different platforms and use different kinds of and receive different kinds of data from all of these different platforms. So there's a fundamental data heterogeneity that exists in all of our sources. So diverse data sources is a very it's a stark reality for us, and I'm sure is for a lot of other NGOs who are operating in this space as well. So diverse data sources is a major consideration for us. Inconsistent metrics. Because we operate, in the public health space, and we use different digital platforms. Terminologies are not always consistent. What one country calls a condition area is a disease area in another country. What one country calls a district hospital or an area hospital is a province hospital in another country. So terminology becomes a little challenging to reconcile across like different regions, especially when you're trying to talk about impact, right? Like what does that mean when you're trying to talk about impact of facility, for example? What do you mean by facility? And that definitions vary, and encoding that in our data is a bit of a challenge. And the last one, of course, again, kind of like is a problem that comes with the scale that we operate at, is that different countries have different laws governing the kind of data, governing the data that they work with. So some countries are okay with the data being hosted elsewhere, some countries are not. Some countries have very specific requirements in terms of where they can be hosted and what can be hosted as well. And countries are kind of like, wisening up to the idea of privacy and making the rules stricter and stricter. So, and that's another very important consideration that basically permeates all of the work that we do across all of the countries. So from Dura's perspective, those were some of the main considerations. And now uh, to battle, or rather to make sure that those considerations are actually taken care of, some of the measures that we've implemented are mentioned here. Again, these are a little generic, so they do cover things that we might not dig deep into in this particular webinar. But know that, these are some of the practices that we actually implement as an organization to make sure that our data is consistent. So I'm happy to talk about them in the Q&A if you are interested, but we might not deep dive into all of them, but this is like a superset of the things that we do. So the most important one is, of course, data cleaning and validation protocols, making sure that all validation checks are done at the source. If there is any constraint on the kind of data that we have, making sure that they are incorporated at the source, making sure that there are automated checks for duplication, automated checks for erroneous data, the way you define it, right? So if these, as much as possible, automate them. Although we know that some things are not automatable, and we will show you an example of that. But as much as possible, let's automate the processes of cleaning and of validating and rectifying erroneous data. The other one, and now that is the protocol layer. The other one is kind of just standardizing the sources themselves. So a real example is that, we because Noora has been operating for the past 10 years, technology has something that we started incorporating only in the past 5 years or so, right? So there are a lot of hospitals that use a paper-based process to still record data. So how can we move them to a digitized process without causing more pain? And kind of getting their buy-in to make sure that, hey, digitization is actually better for both of us. It'll reduce your time and our time in kind of like calculating numbers and calculating impact. And also getting them to talk about, adopt the same terminology, because in conversations sometimes, or in reports, etc., terms are used which are not congruent with the rest of the org's terminology. So that leads to some amount of confusion. So cleaning and validation, not just on a protocol level, but also on the source level, where can you actually encourage people to use better, more digitized data sources. So that's like a huge effort from our end. Improved data governance, goes without saying, directly related to our privacy consideration in the previous slide, which is that, we need to make sure that sensitive data is, only accessible by people who actually need to access that information and isn't accessible to elsewhere. So role-based access to all tiers of information that we collect. Right. And the last one is, of course, like a slightly generic one, talking about technology upgrades, especially in the context of India. There are a lot of ways in which we can improve the UX, improve the way that actually that our stakeholders use technology. So making sure that we adopt all of those. Yeah, I think that's my bit. I'll hand it over to Amar to talk about a specific use case and how we dealt with that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your all the details that you shared, Sriram. I'm Amar. I'm the data analytics manager at Noora Health, and I'll be talking about a specific data monitoring use case to our HEP data collection in Indonesia. So again, to just add a bit of context, we have two sources of data collection for CCP sessions, which is our care companion program, where trainers who we initially talked about are conducting sessions at the hospital. And so they can either share data through the monitoring app that we have built, and this is just kind of a quick view of how that's done, where they're sharing information on session location, what kind of session there was, how many people attended, and then images related to the session. So just kind of a validation kind of a thing. And then they have the WhatsApp chat bot where they can communicate or speak with the chat bot. There isn't any LLM here, in case you're wondering. It's more of like a flow that's been pre-defined that they're using to tell us how many people they have trained, what kind of sessions were conducted. So this creates two sources of data that are coming through into our databases, but they're coming through different sources. And so this presents a bit of a challenge in addition to what we want to achieve. Having two sources means that we have to make sense of it in a single, uh, uh, as a single point of data collection. So, um, and why we need to use it for our monitoring teams, they want to do a lot of resource management. So we have around 200 facilities where sessions are being conducted in Indonesia. And they want to best utilize their resources from our monitoring team's perspective on designing nudges where there are not enough sessions that are taking place or where there might not be the highest quality of sessions. And so, how do they make the decision to conduct quality audits? Because they can conduct it in all 200 facilities, but to understand which facilities they think are underperforming, how do you actually uh, send your resources to actually do that validation or like a quality audit there. There's also a sense of giving visibility for the facilities themselves, for performance monitoring of their own trainers and self accountability efficiency. So how many people are being trained per session by a trainer, to kind of understand if this is a more of a session where it's more personalized to, because in Indonesia we have one-on-one sessions as well, versus it's a larger, like a almost like a classroom kind of a session that's being conducted. Um, but with all of this, something that we notice that comes with those having those two different sources is unexpected user behavior. So you can have all kinds of validation checks in place, but you can't stop the user from creating multiple records instead of editing the previous record if they want to make a change. So, for instance, in the HTTP app, if they've mistakenly said that the session type or the class that they were conducting was more of like an ANC type, but then that was a mistake. It was actually a PNC, and they mistakenly clicked that. They do have the ability to go edit it, but sometimes they might create a new record altogether. Um, or they might be just trying to see how the app works. And so they'll be creating test records on it, or how the chatbot works, and we'll try to communicate, oh, what happens if I say this instead? Um, and then there are sessions that are conducted in the hospital by multiple trainers. In that case, it's possible that instead of one person creating the session, multiple people are creating the session through maybe both of them through their own mobile app, or one of them is creating it on the mobile app and the other one's creating it on the chatbot. So there are all kinds of discrepancies that occur from unexpected user behavior that might not have been that you cannot actually uh, put in like kind of a validation check. And so for that, we have created like a data monitoring um, uh, process where all of the data that we have coming in from the chatbot, the HTTP application, we're pulling in using Dalgo Airbyte into our data warehouse on the raw layer, and we use DBT uh, that transforms the data to transform the data using a particular kind of criteria to sift out data that we think might be uh, or should be flagged. And this could be like, for example, if a trainer has submitted a session within a span of a minute, or if the sessions that they have submitted looks too similar. So having the same number of caregivers train, having the same session type on the same day, it's unlikely that that has happened. And so we kind of push all the other session data ahead into our analytics, but then we create a separate mart or like a separate table for sessions that are missing information that should be there, or sessions that are, which is also less likely for because we have validation checks in place. But the second of flagging sessions that we think might be erroneous could be duplicates, or the number of people are just way too high. They might not have that kind of space in that kind of facility. And so all of those sessions which have been flagged get pushed onto a Google Sheet where our data monitoring team can take a look at that and flag it. And I'll show you guys a bit of that as well. Um, and based on the decisions that they make on each of the session, whether to keep it or remove it, that information gets pushed into the raw layer, which then DBT uses. to sift out sessions that look okay or have been marked as approved or to keep versus those that have been asked to be deleted. DBT is going to remove those, send it forward to the analytics, and then that's what's going to go ahead in the dashboard. Uh, yeah, and so in terms of the uh, data monitoring architecture, the other thing we have is the elementary dashboard, which we are using to uh, look at all the kind of tests that we are running, the health of our tables. There are over 500 tests. Now, this is not just giving us an image of the specific monitoring process that I'm kind of describing here, but it's giving us the health of all the tables that we have across, or all the ETL pipelines that we have across all countries. So we're running quite a lot of different tests to make sure that there are no null values where we shouldn't expect that the relationship test pass. So those are a bit more simple tests, but then there might be some complicated logic in some of the tests as well to say, oh, if you have this value in a particular column, then that can only correspond to this value in another column. So this is what the data monitoring sheet, Google Sheet really looks like, where I've hidden all the data of the session, again for PII purposes, but this is what it looks like in terms of having a source. So what's the source of the app um, of the data, whether it's coming through the bot, which is through the chat bot, or if it's coming through our app, why it has been flagged. We don't really expect people like more than 30, 40 people to be trained. So if the number is like higher than 49, so 50 and above, it's going to be marked as flagged just so that our monitoring team can take a look at it. Sometimes you can contact back to the facility and validate that that was a correct session. And then make a decision on whether to keep that session or remove it. And then that also goes into, if you see columns X and Y, that has like who made that decision and when they made that decision. That's something that's also noted. And then we give them visibility. So our own monitoring teams, they have the visibility on the kind of data that they have marked and what are the stats on it. So where are the most flag sessions really coming from? What are the regencies that's happening? And this, again, empowers them to conduct quality audits in those sessions or in those regions, and also monitor their own performance of making sure that they're not more than X number of sessions within the monitoring file. So the numbers that you're seeing above, like that's just showing you how many rows are there in that are currently flagged and that are currently missing. So the lacking one is usually going to be 0 because of the validation checks, but the flagged sessions, they're going to be still a bit more, and they can see how they're making their decisions by that. And so what were our learnings and takeaways from that, the data mining practices, but not specifically, but in general, is that the quality of your data really begins at source. And this includes like, again, field validation, state cutoffs, profile verifications to make sure the person who, going to input the data is actually somebody that you want to be using that service. But it's also important to note that change here is extremely slow and tedious, especially if you already have other processes that you've had in place in the past. It's going to be difficult to get users to adopt to new ways of using your service or using using the apps to like input the data. And this is why monitoring processes are mandatory. So validations are great, but they do not replace what happens further down the funnel. Um, and and therefore it's important to have like constant upskilling of on-ground staff that is going to be using the app and using the WhatsApp, the chatbot for us. But whatever your service is, this translates exactly to that. And therefore, it's also important to have or to build a user experience that does not lead to data collection fatigue. Um, and that's actually something that the user is comfortable uh, with. Um, Again, the right tool is the one that you use the most or that your users are most used to. So while haggling over tools that can be like productive, in some cases, most of the time, it's about just getting started and then building from there. And it's an iterative process where you optimize for cost, for usability, uh, and make sure that it caters to your users. And so, what's the way forward and future plans for us? One, tighter controls on data sources. And the way we're doing this is by digitizing in places where we have paper-based sources, mostly this is in India, with some user-friendly tools. Keeping in mind that not everywhere is going to be, not everyone is going to be able to replace that, but wherever it's possible. And then automation of data collation workflows, especially where we have data coming in from partners in the form of APIs. Um, that's where we could do this. And then AI tools. I know it's quite a buzzword these days, AI, but actually using AI for like OCR based OCR technology for paper-based attendance, and then making the chatbot that we have more conversational instead of more structured, giving it that flexibility to pull in data and really understand how the user or what the user intends to do. Um, and building in our data engineering and analytics capacity, and this can be in the form of hiring for those key roles, but also upskilling our field staff on data collection methodology. Yeah, thank you so much. And we would love to answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, everybody. Now would be a good time to unmute yourself and ask any questions you have, especially if the Noora team, they're here and you have their time. So exploit it. If any of you are speaking,
Hi,
yeah.
good afternoon. Mayurika here. So I just have one question, and that was like in the initial discussion when you were presenting, you did say something about, doing a data test. So if you could just elaborate on it a bit.
Sure, sure. So data tests are actually something that can be done very easily when you use DBT for your transformation. But in general, the idea behind doing a data test is you have your data collection, you've pulled all the data from your data sources, whether it's Google Sheets or Comcare, whatever it is, into your warehouse already. It's present there, it's ready for you to read, right? In the process of transformation in that data, what you can do is you can run a test. So that will just do things like, hey, okay, it's very important to me that I have the name and the Aadhaar number of all of my beneficiaries, right? So you can just do a data test to say, hey, can you check that in the column which stores the Aadhaar number and the name of all of my beneficiaries, there are no null values, right? Nobody has submitted the form without putting that in. Or you can write a data test to say, okay, I need all of the Aadhaar numbers that I'm getting to be of the integer type. Or you can even put in more logical tests, right? Unit tests, like the example I gave you. Suppose you're collecting information on a mother and a child because you're providing maternity care. So you might want to put in an age check, right? So you might want to say, hey, okay, make sure that the mother is above 18, and if the mother is like younger than 18 years old, then maybe you put down a flag to say, okay, some then this might be a case of potential child abuse we need to look into. So data tests are just something that allows you to program in logic to say, okay, these are the things that I don't want to be seeing in my data. If any of these happen, then the data test will come up onto your elementary dashboard in the case of DBT. Or if you're doing it elsewhere also, it'll come up for you as saying that this test has been failed, and it'll tell you, which rows it failed in. And that what that allows you to do is then go into your data warehouse or your database, and then you can look at that row and you can see, okay, this logic is failing, right? That means either the Aadhaar number is empty, or maybe the mother's age has been put down as 15 years old, and that's something you need to look into. So that's essentially the concept behind data tests. Does that make sense to you? Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. It's just that, at the moment, the kind of data that we operate with, it is also quite a lot to do with manual data. So not a lot of it is, entered via forms or anything.
Mm-hmm.
It is
Mm-hmm.
directly entered on Excel.
Okay.
So at times such errors do occur, and because they are also larger data sets, it becomes slightly difficult to check on those.
Of course.
So yeah.
Yeah, you can write data tests for that too. I mean, in Excel, especially personally, I found like format tests to be very useful, right? Some people might enter dates as day, month, year. Other people might put in month, day, year. So you want to make sure everything is standardized in the correct format. So if you're expecting the month number, but then you're seeing the number 22 there instead, then you know that, hey, okay, I'm interpreting this date wrong. So data tests like that can be very useful, even if your information is all on sheets. It doesn't have to come from forms. No matter how your data collection is happening, data tests can be very useful.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I see that Jaspriya has raised her hand. Do you have a question?
Hi, yes. So my question was regarding the presentation about Noora Health. There was a point about the future aspects which mentioned OCR technology for paper-based documents, I suppose. If someone could elaborate on that.
Yeah, for sure. I could tell you a bit about that. We have paper-based information from our sessions coming in India. And when I'm talking about the OCR technology, I'm referring to, instead of having somebody hand input that data by hand, actually use OCR to read those forms and then do it. But there might be a component there of actually designing those forms, which are then used by the hospitals to put information of the sessions, which then go through uh, uh, an OCR to pull that data and digitize that. Um, but that was what I was referring to. Is there a more specific element of that question that you want me to get into?
So it's basically like a software or something which we customize to our organization needs, or is it like a general software?
So it'll be built in-house, but it will use um, out-of-the-box solutions like Hugging Face, so models created by Hugging Face, or um, the LLMs, which something like Gemini is also very strong in taking images and then converting that into text. So it will use technologies like that, but it will be customized to our need. Yes.
Yeah. And I think I can add to this a little bit also. So, like, just for everybody, OCR stands for optical character recognition, right? So, it's not a particular tool or a particular piece of software. It's basically just describing a software capability where you have text on a piece of paper and then you scan it, you upload it to a computer, and then there's a piece of customized software over there which can do OCR, which is it can see what letters are there, convert it into a document automatically. So there are ways to build customizable OCR solutions as well, based off of whatever your form format are. There are ways to redesign your paper forms to be more OCR friendly as well. Like sometimes you might have seen forms which say that, okay, write everything only in capital letters, and then they give you boxes to write it in, right? Those forms are generally optimized for being easy to read by computers. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think that answers my question.
Yeah. I'm also seeing a question on the chat. Deepa Lee is saying, could we talk a little bit more about conversational bot based attendance tracking? Interested in how attendance is managed via a bot. Do either of you from the Noora team want to field that question? Amar, Sriram?
Yeah, Sriram, do you want to take that?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I can talk about that. So, the idea behind the bot-based tracking was essentially that we wanted to introduce an app. This was in Indonesia. We wanted to introduce an app, but I think healthcare workers over there were already using a lot of apps, and the government is very reluctant to introduce yet another app. So this is an idea that was brewing for a while. Essentially use a bot, or essentially use WhatsApp, where if you can have a conversation where I just ask one question after the other and then have validations for each response. Can I do simple things like a form collection of just collecting, like 5 or 6 data points? Can I do that via a chat-based interface? So Yeah, so this was our first venture into like a chat-based interface, and it's actually worked out pretty well. Like honestly, the more we the more we expand in Indonesia, more and more people are interested in the chatbot because it's easy. It's already on WhatsApp. You're already present, so it's a good modality to collect information. I would say that yeah, I mean there's a lot of scope to improve also. Like nowadays, especially with LLMs, you can turn conversations into rich data points, right? So you don't necessarily need to keep it boring, and just have a Q&A system like how it is right now. And we're already working on improving that that flow as well. So I would say would definitely recommend trying it. But of course, if you have like 20 questions, then it's going to get pretty tedious, right? So we have 5 to 6 questions, so it gets over in a 2 3 minute span. So think about the length of your form, what kind of data you want to collect, and how easy it is to do on WhatsApp. So the UX is everything here. So yeah, just think about that. But I definitely think it's possible. Yeah.
There's a follow-up question here, Sriram, which is, are you using an application like Glyphic or did you develop it in-house? So Glyphic is another Project Tech for Dev subsidiary, and basically it's a platform for building chatbots. So yeah, that's a follow-up question from Sajid.
Yeah, we don't use Glyphic actually, but we use a platform like Glyphic called Turn.io, and that's where we set up our all of our conversational automations and bots and everything. Yeah.
Awesome, very cool. Does anybody have any other questions they want to ask? I see someone has raised their hand. Yes.
Hello.
What's your name?
Hello, I am Iksha from Titli organization.
Hi, Iksha.
I just wanted to ask what are some effective measures one can take to ensure data quality in their work?
Yeah, sure. I can talk a little bit about that. So we went over this in some more detail towards the beginning of the presentation, actually, and maybe I can pull up that slide as well. So we will share the deck with you all, but yeah, I'll quickly share my screen and give you a brief summary of what we talked about in case you missed it. Um, so yeah, these are a few things that I would recommend you should start off with, right? One, of course, is data tests, which I already went into a little bit more detail about with the previous question. Another is prioritize deduplication. So an important part of that is defining what is a duplicate for you. So every NGO I work with has a different definition of a duplicate. So define what a duplicate means for you, right? Does it mean when two form submissions have the same form ID? Is that a duplicate for you? Or is it a duplicate for you if one of your users submits one entry more than once a day? In some cases, that's a duplicate. So define that, and wherever you're, doing your transformation logic for your code, make sure you put in tests for that to make sure there are no duplicates happening. Do some data profiling, which means once in a while sit down and run some analytics on your data. So just see if the logic is adding up, right? So the example I gave over here was this: if you have a lot of people submitting the form saying that their age is between 90 and 120, then it may not break any of your rules or any of your tests, because that's a valid answer for some people to give. But the logic of that might not make sense to you, that how are so many people in that age group, right? So that might be something you then need to go and investigate. Noora talked about this in great detail as well, but standardization across different sources. So if you have data coming from several different sources, make sure that you're using similar terminology across them, or you're standardizing it, or you're using similar, brackets, similar kinds of questions you're asking. So that way, when you bring them together, it's easier to do analysis on them. There are a couple of things like that which I think are good places to start.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other questions? If there are any other questions, then now would be a great time to ask, because we've hit the time limit and we'll be closing out soon. So yeah. All right then. Thank you, everybody, so much for participating. We hope you all learned something, got some insight into how an organization is doing things. That can be very useful sometimes. And if you want to connect, then please feel free to reach out to any of us over at Dalgo.